My son-in-law slid a document across the table. Sign over the property, or I swear you will never see those children again. I smiled, and I signed. He walked upstairs looking like a man who'd just won everything. What he didn't know, 37 years as a court archivist had taught me to read not just words, but the spaces between them. Before continuing, subscribe to our new channel, where we tell stories about men who take revenge on their insolent children, sons-in-law, and daughters-in-law. My name is Raymond Coleman. I'm 68 years old, and I've lived in the same house on Rutledge Avenue in Charleston, South Carolina, for 31 years. Before I retired, I spent 37 years as a senior archivist at the Charleston County Circuit Court, a job that most people assume is boring, and honestly, most of the time it was. But boring work teaches you something that flashier careers rarely do. It teaches you to read, not just words on a page, but the spaces between them, the things people leave out, the clauses that sound reasonable until you hold them up to the light. I am not a dramatic man. I don't raise my voice. I don't slam doors. When something bothers me, I tend to go quiet, which my daughter Shannon has always misread as indifference. It is not indifference. It is patience. There is a difference, though it took me a long time to understand that not everyone around me could see it. Charleston in February is one of those places that can't decide what season it wants to be. Some mornings you wake up to something almost warm, Spanish moss moving gently in a soft breeze, the smell of the river coming up through the window screens. Other mornings it's gray and damp, and the cold settles into the old bones of these houses like it belongs there. The house at 2214. Rutledge Avenue is one of those old bones, built in 1962. 3 bedrooms, a deep front porch, a kitchen that faces the backyard. I bought it in 1994. I painted it myself. I replaced the plumbing myself. When the oak tree in the back dropped a branch onto the roof during a storm 12 years ago, I climbed up there with a tarp at 6 in the morning and fixed what I could before the rain came back. That house is mine in a way that goes beyond paperwork. But paperwork matters. I know that better than most. My son-in-law, Cody Pierce, 38 years old, came into my daughter's life 6 years ago like a man who had practiced his entrance. Confident handshake, easy smile, the kind of laugh that fills a room. He sold real estate, or rather, he positioned himself as someone who moved real estate, which is a different thing entirely. He talked about markets the way other men talk about sports, with that particular excitement that only makes sense if you already believe you're winning. Shannon was 41 and had been careful about relationships for years. And when she fell for Cody, she fell the way careful people sometimes do. Completely, without looking down. I tried to like him. I want to be honest about that. At the beginning, I genuinely tried. He was good with my grandchildren. My grandson Kyle, who was 13 then, quiet and watchful like I am, and my granddaughter Brittany, who was 10 and had Shannon's laugh. He brought them things, took them places, paid attention to them in the effortful way of a man who understands that the children are the audition. I noticed that too, but I told myself I was being uncharitable, the way protective fathers sometimes are, and I kept my mouth shut. The problems crept in the way problems usually do, not all at once, but in small, deniable increments. A year into the marriage, Shannon mentioned offhand that 2 of Cody's investment deals had hit some complications. A few months after that, I noticed Cody spending long stretches on his phone at the dinner table, his jaw tight, his responses to conversation growing shorter and shorter. Shannon started picking up the check at restaurants when she and I went out. Not unusual on its own, but she'd always been careful with money. And there was something slightly deliberate about the gesture, like she was covering for something she hadn't told me yet. Then 14 months ago, they moved in. Just temporarily, Shannon said, while things stabilize. I said yes, because she's my daughter, and those are my grandchildren, and because the house has 3 bedrooms, and I live alone. That was my first mistake, though not in the way I first thought. The real mistake wasn't saying yes. The real mistake was not immediately defining what temporarily meant in writing. Cody changed after he moved in. The performance loosened. The easy smile was still there, but it appeared on a delay now, like a man who had to remind himself to put it on. He started having long phone calls in the backyard, walking in circles near the fence, his free hand cutting through the air. When he came back inside, he'd drop into the nearest chair and stare at the ceiling for a moment before he remembered where he was. He started talking about the house differently. Not dramatically, Cody was too smart for that, but in the way someone tests a surface before putting weight on it. "This neighborhood's really held its value," he said one evening, looking out the front window at the street. I agreed and changed the subject. 2 weeks later, at dinner. "You ever think about whether this place is the right size for you, Raymond? A man on his own, house this big?" Shannon gave him a look. He smiled and let it drop. I didn't react, but I started listening more carefully. The banking statements were what broke things open for me. Cody had a habit, careless or calculated, I'm still not entirely sure, of leaving papers on the kitchen counter, bills, printouts, documents. I think he assumed I didn't look at them. I've spent 37 years cataloging legal documents, which means I have a particular kind of peripheral vision. I see what's on a piece of paper the way other people see the color of a shirt. I can't help it. 3 months after they moved in, I saw a statement from an LLC called Palmetto Evergreen Holdings. The address on the statement was 2214 Rutledge Avenue, my address. I recognized the rental income figure from one of my own properties on Meeting Street. I didn't pick the paper up. I didn't say anything. I walked to the coffee maker, poured myself a cup, and went back to my room. That evening, I opened the lower drawer of my desk and started a folder. The night it all came to a head, Kyle and Brittany had gone to bed early. Shannon was upstairs. Cody and I were alone in the kitchen, him at the table, me washing a pan at the sink. I heard him set something down, the flat sound of paper on wood. "Raymond," his voice had shifted into a register I hadn't heard before. Quieter, more deliberate. "Come sit down." I dried my hands and sat. On the table between us was a quitclaim deed. I recognized the format immediately. I've processed hundreds of them. This one listed all 3 of my properties: the house on Rutledge Avenue, the 2 rental units on Meeting Street. The transfer was to an LLC I didn't recognize. There was a signature line at the bottom with my name already typed beneath it. "I need you to sign this," Cody said. He was watching me the way a man watches a door he expects to have to kick in. I looked at the document, then I looked at him. "Sign it," he said again. "Or I swear to you, I swear, you will not see those kids again. I'll take Shannon, I'll take the children, and you will not see them." He paused, and his voice got very calm. "I'm not threatening you. I'm just being clear." I looked at him for a long moment. Then I smiled. I picked up the pen he'd set on the table, and I signed. Cody's expression shifted into something close to satisfaction. He took the papers from the table, squared the edges against the wood, and tucked them under his arm. He told me it was the right decision. He told me I'd made things easier for everyone. He even said he appreciated it, in the tone of a man who had never actually appreciated anything in his life. Then he went upstairs. I sat at the kitchen table for about 30 seconds. Then I got up, walked to my room, and sat down at my desk. I reached down and opened the lower drawer. Inside was a folder I'd been building for 6 months, and underneath it, a second document. Blank. The same size as a quitclaim deed. The same weight paper. The same format in every way that mattered in poor kitchen light at 9 o'clock at night. The one Cody had taken upstairs had my signature on it, all right. It just wasn't the one he'd brought to the table. The next morning I made coffee before 6. I stood at the kitchen window with my mug and watched the backyard go from gray to pale gold, the way it does in February when the sky decides to cooperate. The oak tree was bare. A cardinal landed on the fence post for about 3 seconds, looked around with that bright-eyed suspicion cardinals always seem to carry, and left. I drank my coffee and thought about quitclaim deeds, and about the particular expression on Cody Pierce's face when he thought he'd won something. I've restored antique nautical charts as a hobby for the last 11 years. Old maps, 18th century, 19th century, some of them so fragile you have to work under a magnifying glass with instruments barely thicker than a hair. The work requires something that most people find uncomfortable, the willingness to slow down to the point where it almost feels like stopping. Every chart I've ever worked on came into my hands damaged in one way or another. Torn edges, water stains, ink that had faded to near invisibility. The work is never about rushing toward the finished result. It's about understanding exactly what's in front of you before you touch anything at all. I thought about that, standing at the window with my coffee. Then I thought about the folder in my desk drawer, and about the meeting I was going to schedule that morning with an attorney named Marcus Wells. Let me go back 6 months, because that's where this really starts. It was late summer, one of those evenings when Charleston holds the heat long after dark and the ceiling fans are doing their best and no one is entirely comfortable. I'd come downstairs for a glass of water around 11 at night. The kitchen light was on, which meant someone had left it on by accident. Shannon and Cody were both upstairs. I was about to switch it off when I saw the papers on the counter. A bank statement. Not mine. I didn't touch it, but I read it, standing there in the kitchen with a glass of water in my hand. The way you sometimes read something you know you're going to spend a long time thinking about. The account name was Palmetto Evergreen Holdings, LLC. The address was my address. The deposit line showed rental income that matched almost exactly the figure my tenant on Meeting Street paid every month. I went back to bed. I did not sleep particularly well. Over the following weeks, I started paying a different kind of attention. Not paranoid attention. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't following anyone or rifling through drawers. I was simply applying the same skill I'd applied every working day for 37 years. I read what was in front of me, carefully. Cody had a habit of leaving documents in common spaces, which in a house this size meant the kitchen counter, the table by the front door, occasionally the arm of the living room couch. He treated these spaces like an extension of his own office, which told me something about how he thought of the house in general. I started keeping a notebook. Dates, document names, figures I'd seen. I wrote in my ordinary handwriting, the cramped, practiced shorthand I'd developed over decades of archival work, which no one else would find particularly legible. I kept the notebook in the lower drawer of my desk, under a 1887 navigation chart of the Charleston Harbor that I'd been restoring for 3 months. By the time Cody put the quitclaim deed on the kitchen table that February night, I had 6 months of notes, photocopies of 3 documents I'd found left in plain sight, and a very clear picture of what he was building. What Cody was building, as best I could reconstruct it, was a bridge. He had debts. That much I'd understood for some time, even before the statements on the counter. The kind of debts that accumulate when a man with more confidence than capital makes 3 or 4 real estate flip investments in a row, and every single one of them comes apart. I didn't know the exact figure then. I found it out later. But I could read the pressure in him the way you can read weather in old bones, in the way he moved, the way his voice changed on certain phone calls, the way he started looking at the house on Rutledge Avenue the way a man looks at a resource. The quitclaim deed was meant to be the bridge. Transfer the properties, my house, the 2 rental units, to an LLC he controlled. Use the assets to refinance, restructure, pay back the investors who were presumably no longer being patient about it. Shannon was part of the plan, whether she fully understood it or not, and I was the obstacle that needed to be removed, preferably with minimal resistance. He hadn't counted on one thing, that the man sitting across from him in that kitchen had spent the better part of his career watching people try to sign away things that didn't belong to them. I remember the afternoon I taught Kyle, my grandson, Shannon's boy, how to play chess. He was 9 years old. He had his grandmother's eyes and my tendency to go quiet when he was thinking hard about something. We sat at this same kitchen table, the board between us, and I showed him the pieces one at a time. He was impatient, the way 9-year-olds are impatient. He wanted to know how to win. You don't think about winning, I told him. You think about the board. You think about where everything is. And then you think about where everything is going to be. He looked at me with that expression children get when an adult says something they suspect is more complicated than it sounds, but can't quite figure out why yet. That's just thinking ahead, he said. That's exactly what it is, I said. He beat me about 8 months later. I let him think I hadn't seen it coming. I had. The document I'd signed the previous night, the one Cody had taken upstairs with that satisfied expression on his face, was a receipt of document copy form. Standard language, no legal weight, the kind of form that exists primarily to confirm that someone received a copy of something. I'd prepared it 3 weeks earlier, after it became clear where things were heading. Same paper stock as the quitclaim deed, same general layout in the dim kitchen light. I'd signed my name on the correct line, in good faith, as one does when confirming the receipt of a copy. In the morning I showered, dressed, and drove to the office of Marcus Wells on Broadway Street. I'd found his name through a former colleague at the courthouse. Not a friend, just someone I'd worked near for years who'd mentioned Wells in the context of a property dispute. I brought my folder, all 6 months of it. Wells was a careful man, maybe 50. With reading glasses he kept pushing up his nose as he worked through the pages. He didn't say much for the first 20 minutes. When he finished, he set the folder down, took his glasses off, and looked at me. "Mr. Coleman," he said, "if this documentation is accurate," he tapped the folder, "this isn't simply a civil property matter." I looked at him and waited. "The LLC, the addresses, the rental income routing." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "This has the structure of wire fraud, which is federal." I nodded once. I already knew that. I'd known it for about 4 months. I had simply needed someone else to say it out loud, so that the next step had a proper foundation. "I'd like to retain you," I said. "Where do we start?" Wells put his glasses back on and reached for a legal pad. Outside, through his 5th-floor window, the winter sky over Charleston was pale and wide. Somewhere across town, Cody Pierce was almost certainly unfolding what he believed was a signed quitclaim deed and beginning to make his plans. I was already 3 moves ahead of him. I just hadn't shown him the board yet. The morning after my meeting with Marcus Wells, I came downstairs to find Cody already in the kitchen. He was standing at the counter with his back to me, pouring coffee, and something in the set of his shoulders told me immediately that the night had not gone the way he expected. There's a particular quality to a man who has been confident for a very long time and has just discovered, for the first time, a crack in his own certainty. The confidence is still there. It doesn't disappear overnight, but it's performing itself slightly harder than usual. Cody's version of this was a tightness across his upper back and a way of moving that was about 3% more deliberate than normal. I noticed it the way you notice a hairline fracture in an old document before you even reach for the magnifying glass. "Morning," he said without turning around. "Morning," I said, and went to the refrigerator. We didn't speak again. He left the kitchen with his coffee, and I heard him go upstairs. About 20 minutes later, I heard his voice through the ceiling. Muffled, but with the clipped cadence of someone making a series of phone calls they had not planned to make the day before. I ate my toast, washed the plate, and went to my room to wait. It took 11 days. I want to be precise about those 11 days, because they were instructive in a way I hadn't fully anticipated. I had expected Cody, once he realized what he had in his hands, to come at me hard and fast. He was an impatient man, I'd learned that much, and impatient men tend to escalate when they feel cornered. What I hadn't fully accounted for was that he would need time to build his version of events first. He needed a story to tell before he could confront me with it. So he spent 11 days on his phone and in his car and on long walks around the block, quietly constructing the narrative he planned to use. Shannon moved through the house during this period like a woman waiting for a weather system to arrive. She knew something had shifted. She didn't ask me about it directly, which told me she already had a version of events from Cody, a version that presumably cast me in an unflattering light. She made dinner 3 nights in a row without acknowledging me beyond passing the bread. She laughed at something Cody said and then glanced at me to see if I'd noticed. I had noticed. I ate my dinner and didn't react, which is, in my experience, one of the most effective things a person can do in almost any situation. Kyle, my grandson, 14 years old that spring, was the one variable Cody hadn't fully considered. Kyle had always been the quiet one in his family's household, which adults tend to mistake for inattentiveness. In my experience, the quiet ones are the ones who are paying closest attention. He sat at dinner and watched his father with that particular stillness that I recognized, because I'd had it at his age too. Kyle was building a picture. He just hadn't decided yet what to do with it. The confrontation came on a Tuesday evening, about 3 weeks after the night with the quitclaim deed. I was in the living room reading when Cody came in from the kitchen and sat down across from me. Shannon was upstairs. I heard the sound of the television going on in the master bedroom. A deliberate absence, if I had to guess. Cody had a printout in his hand. He set it on the coffee table between us, face up. "That document you signed," he said. My attorney looked at it. I turned a page of my book and looked at him over the top of it. "Did he? It's a receipt form." His voice was controlled, but only just. "It's worthless. You swapped them out." "I signed what was on the table," I said. He stared at me for a moment with an expression I hadn't seen from him before. Not anger exactly, but something older and colder than anger. Recalibration. "You want to play it that way?" he said. It wasn't a question. "Cody," I said, setting the book down, "you can raise your voice if you feel you need to. That's your choice. But before you do..." I reached to the side table and picked up a single sheet of paper I'd placed there 2 hours earlier, while he was still in his car making calls. I set it on the coffee table next to his printout. "I'd like you to explain this to me first." He looked at the paper. It was a printout of the South Carolina Business Registry entry for Palmetto Evergreen Holdings, LLC, registered 6 months earlier, to an address in North Charleston with a registered agent whose name I did not recognize. Beside that, I'd attached a one-page summary, in my handwriting, of 3 months of rental income deposits from my property on Meeting Street. Income that had been routing, according to the bank statements he'd left on the kitchen counter, through an account that matched the LLC's registration. The color went out of his face in a way I found genuinely interesting. Not all at once, gradually starting around his jaw and moving upward, the way ink bleeds out of old paper when it gets wet. He picked up the sheet and read it, though I could tell from his eyes that he wasn't really reading, he was calculating. "Where did you get this?" he said. "Public record," I said. "Anyone can look it up." He set it down very carefully, the way you set something down when you want to break it, but know you can't afford to. He stood up. He didn't say anything else. He walked out of the living room, and I heard him on the stairs, then his footsteps across the upstairs hallway, then the sound of the bedroom door closing. Not a slam, which told me he was working harder than he wanted to let on. Shannon came downstairs about 20 minutes later and stood in the living room doorway, looking at the papers on the coffee table. "What is that?" she asked. "Just some paperwork," I said. She looked at me for a long moment, then went to the kitchen. I picked up my book. The next morning, I called a number I had found 3 days earlier in the South Carolina Private Investigators Directory, a professional licensing registry maintained by the state. The listing was for a woman named Pamela Stroud, licensed investigator specializing in financial fraud and asset tracing, operating out of an office on East Bay Street in downtown Charleston. I left a message. She called back within 2 hours. We met 2 days later at a coffee shop called the Hound House on King Street. Neutral ground, no connection to either of us. Pamela Stroud was somewhere in her mid-50s, with reading glasses on a chain and the particular manner of someone who has spent years listening to people tell her things they believe are more complicated than they actually are. She had a legal pad and a pen, and she wrote things down in precise, unhurried handwriting. I gave her the folder, not the original, which was staying in my desk drawer, but a clean copy I'd made at the library 2 days earlier. I walked her through the 5 transactions I'd flagged. 3 rental income deposits that had moved through Palmetto Evergreen Holdings, 1 wire transfer I'd traced to a second LLC registered in Georgia, and a property refinancing document I'd found in plain sight on the front hall table 3 months back, which listed my address on Meeting Street as collateral for a loan I had never authorized. Stroud read through the copies carefully. When she finished, she tapped the refinancing document with her pen. "You said you didn't authorize this," she said. "I did not." "And your name is on it as the property owner of record?" "It is." She wrote something on her pad. "I'll need 2 weeks, possibly 3. I charge $185 an hour, plus documented expenses. I'll give you a written estimate before I start anything substantial." "That's fine," I said. She looked at me with an expression that was professional, but not entirely without curiosity. "Most people who come to me with something like this are upset," she said. "You don't seem upset." "I'm past upset," I said. "I'm interested." She almost smiled. "Almost. She capped her pen and stood up. I'll be in touch. I drove home along the river, the afternoon light flat and gray on the water. The oak tree in the backyard was starting to show the first faint suggestion of leaves. Still weeks away from anything you'd call green, but present, thinking about it, getting ready. I knew the feeling. 1 week later, my phone rang. It was Pamela Stroud. Raymond, she said. We had moved to first names somewhere in the second meeting. There's more here than you thought, she paused. A lot more. I met Pamela Stroud again at the Hound House. Same corner table, same gray afternoon light coming through the front window. She had a folder this time, thicker than mine had been. She set it on the table and opened it without preamble. Let me start with what I can confirm, she said. What she could confirm was this. Cody Pierce had used the addresses of my 2 rental properties on Meeting Street as collateral for mortgage refinancing applications filed through 2 separate lenders, one a mid-sized regional bank in Columbia, one a private lending firm operating out of Atlanta. Both applications had been filed in the name of individuals who were not me. Both had listed me as a cosigner, with documentation that included what appeared to be my signature on consent forms I had never seen. The total amount drawn across both transactions was $287,000. I sat with that number for a moment, not because it surprised me, by then I had suspected something in this range, but because hearing a specific number changes the nature of what you're dealing with. A suspicion is a weather forecast. A number is a measurement. The difference matters. The refinancing applications were submitted electronically, Stroud said. Wire transfers were used to move the loan proceeds. Under federal law, that's wire fraud. 18 U.S.C. Section 1343. This isn't a civil matter about property ownership. This is a criminal matter, and it's in federal jurisdiction. I nodded. Marcus Wells had said the same thing in different words 3 weeks earlier. Hearing it from 2 separate professionals, independently, had a clarifying effect. There's one more thing, Stroud said. She turned to the last section of the folder. Palmetto Evergreen Holdings, the LLC your rental income was routed through, is connected to a second entity called Coastal Meridian Investments, registered in Georgia. Coastal Meridian has applied for a commercial line of credit using projected rental income from your Meeting Street properties as part of its financial statement. She looked at me over her reading glasses. Your properties, Raymond. Listed as assets in a company you've never heard of. How much is the line of credit application for? $175,000. Not yet approved, as far as I can tell, but the application is in. So the total potential exposure, if everything had gone through, was somewhere north of $460,000. Against properties I had built over 40 years. Against my name, on documents I had never signed. I drank my coffee and looked out the window at King Street. A group of tourists was passing on the sidewalk, someone pointing up at a building. Normal afternoon, normal city. Somewhere across town, Cody Pierce was sitting in his car or his office, probably adjusting the timeline on some part of his plan that wasn't moving as fast as he wanted. What do you need from me to complete your documentation? I asked. Stroud had a list ready. She was good at her job. That same week, I drove to Marcus Wells' office on Broadway Street and laid out everything Stroud had found. Wells read through the new materials with the quiet intensity of a man who has learned to keep his reactions off his face until he's ready to use them. When he finished, he set the folder down and pulled off his reading glasses. This changes the scope considerably, he said. I assumed it would. I want to be direct with you, Raymond. He folded his hands on the desk. This is no longer something I can handle alone within the civil track. What Stroud has documented, combined with your original materials, constitutes a package that should go to the FBI, specifically their Financial Crimes Unit, and from there to the U.S. Attorney's Office for South Carolina. I understand. Before we do that, he said, I want to make sure your position is as protected as it can be, which means we need to talk about the trust. The Revocable Living Trust was Wells's suggestion, and it was a good one. Under South Carolina law, property held in a properly established revocable trust is titled in the name of the trust itself rather than the individual. This meant that even if Cody found a way to pursue further civil action against me personally, the properties would be insulated. They would belong to the Raymond A. Coleman Revocable Living Trust, not to Raymond A. Coleman, the individual. Any legal challenge would have to go through a different and considerably more complicated process. The setup required a notarized trust document, a formal deed transfer for each property, and recording fees at the County Register of Deeds, a total cost of $3,200, which I paid by check the following week. It was the least dramatic $3,200 I had ever spent, and probably the most useful. I signed the trust documents on a Wednesday morning at the Register of Deeds office on Broad Street, the real ones this time with full awareness of exactly what I was signing. The notary stamped each page with the brisk efficiency of someone who does this 8 times a day and has no idea that the man sitting across from her just placed 3 properties worth over $1 million beyond the reach of a federal fraud suspect. I thanked her. She gave me copies. I went home. The thing about careful preparations is that it looks, from the outside, like nothing is happening. I went fishing on the Cooper River that Saturday, the way I do most Saturdays in early spring. I caught 2 redfish and a drum, none of them worth keeping, and released them all back into the water without particular ceremony. I came home, cleaned my gear, and sat on the back porch with a glass of iced tea, while the evening came in from the east. Inside the house, I could hear Cody on his phone. The calls had been getting longer and more frequent over the past 2 weeks. Not agitated exactly, but pressured, the way a man sounds when he's managing multiple moving parts, and one of them has started to slip. I had no way of knowing what specifically had changed in his calculations. I could make reasonable guesses. Whatever Wells had filed as preliminary paperwork in the civil track, a routine notice, nothing dramatic, had apparently reached someone connected to Cody's circle because Shannon had been watching me differently for the past several days. That night, well after midnight, I woke up to the sound of Shannon's voice in the hallway. I couldn't hear words, just her voice, low and tense and shaped around questions, and underneath it, Cody's responses, clipped and certain the way he got when he was directing rather than discussing. I lay in bed in the dark and listened to the rhythm of it without the content. The hallway light was on. I could see it under my door. After about 4 minutes, it went off. Footsteps back to the master bedroom. Silence. In the morning, I made coffee and didn't mention it. Neither did Shannon. Neither did Cody, who came downstairs looking like a man who had slept 3 hours and was pretending he hadn't. 2 days later, Wells called. "The trust documents have been recorded," he said. "Everything is official. The properties are in the trust as of this morning." I said that was good. "There's something else," he said. "I got a call this afternoon from a colleague at the county assessor's office. Someone made an inquiry yesterday about the ownership status of your Meeting Street properties. The inquiry came from an attorney in Mount Pleasant." I looked him up. He represents private lenders and investment groups. I set down my coffee mug. "Cody's creditors are checking on the collateral," I said. "That's my read," Wells said. So it had started. Whatever bridge Cody had promised his investors, my properties, my address, my name on documents I'd never touched, was beginning to wobble. The creditors were getting nervous. And a nervous creditor, in my experience, had a way of accelerating everyone else's timeline. That night, I heard Shannon's phone ring just after 2 a.m. Through the wall, I heard Cody's voice, sharp and low. "Don't wake your father. Do not wake him." Then Shannon's voice, quieter, asking something. Then Cody again, and the specific phrase came through the wall with the particular clarity that houses built in 1962 are prone to at 2 a.m. He filed documents. We need to move now. I lay in the dark with my hands folded on my chest and looked at the ceiling. Outside, the first frogs of spring were going at it down by the drainage ditch on the far side of the yard, an optimistic, relentless sound, completely indifferent to the situation inside the house on Rutledge Avenue. I thought about the trust documents sitting in a drawer at the Register of Deeds office. I thought about Pamela Stroud's folder and Marcus Wells's legal pad and the $287,000 that existed on paper, somewhere in the name of an LLC registered to a man who was currently sleeping in my house. I closed my eyes. Let him move, I thought. I've already moved. The legal papers arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a process server who rang the doorbell at 8:45 while I was still in the kitchen with my coffee. I signed for the envelope, thanked him, and brought it inside. I set it on the kitchen table and read it before I did anything else, the way you should always read a document before you react to it. What I was holding was a petition filed in the Court of Common Pleas of Charleston County, seeking a judicial determination of incapacity under South Carolina Code, Section 62-5-303. The petition named me as the respondent. The petitioner was listed as Cody Allen Pierce, acting as a concerned family member. It was accompanied by an affidavit from a physician identified as Dr. Gerald Hessen, M.D., of a practice in North Charleston, attesting to what it described as observed cognitive decline consistent with early-stage dementia, including disorientation, impaired judgment, and inability to manage financial affairs. I read it twice. Then I set it down and finished my coffee. The petition was, as legal maneuvers go, structurally clever. South Carolina's adult guardianship statute allows a family member to petition the court for an incapacity determination if a licensed physician provides supporting documentation. If granted, the court appoints a guardian or conservator to manage the respondent's affairs, which would include, in theory, the ability to challenge or unwind a recently established trust on the grounds that the grantor lacked the mental capacity to execute it. Cody had found the one available thread that might unravel what I'd built. I'll give him this. He was resourceful. Desperate, but resourceful. I called Marcus Wells at 9:15. He picked up on the second ring. "I've been waiting for your call," he said. "I was served a copy as counsel of record about an hour ago." "The physician," I said. "Gerald Hessen." "I'm already looking into him." "What do you need from me?" "A full cognitive evaluation from an independent neurologist," Wells said. "Licensed, board certified. No connection to anyone involved in this matter. The sooner the better. We want to file a response before Cody's side can build any momentum." I wrote down the name of the clinic he recommended, Coastal Neurological Associates on James Island, a 20-minute drive from Rutledge Avenue. He said he'd call ahead. I said I'd go that afternoon. The evaluation took most of the following day. I want to be accurate about what it involved because Cody had apparently counted on the assumption that the process would be either too complicated or too undignified for a 68-year-old man to submit to willingly. He was wrong on both counts. The neurologist was a quiet woman in her 50s named Dr. Anita Farrow, who ran me through 4 hours of standardized cognitive testing, memory recall, pattern recognition, executive function tasks, verbal fluency assessments. With the brisk professionalism of someone who has performed these evaluations hundreds of times and has no patience for drama from either direction. When it was over, she looked at her notes and then at me. "Your scores are in the 91st percentile for your age group," she said. "Across all domains, there is no clinical evidence of cognitive impairment." "I appreciate your thoroughness," I said. "The documentation submitted by Dr. Hessen," she said carefully, "does not reflect any examination methodology I recognize as standard." She paused. "I want to be clear that I can only speak to my own findings." "That's all I need," I said. I drove home along the bridge over the Ashley River, the afternoon light flat on the water. I was not angry. I want to be precise about that. What I felt was something more like the particular quiet that settles in when a situation clarifies itself. When the shape of what you're dealing with becomes fully visible and there are no more surprises waiting in the peripheral corners. Cody had paid a physician for a false affidavit. He had filed it in a court of law. And now I had a certified neurologist's report that made his document look like what it was. Wells filed the response 4 days later. Attached to it were Dr. Farrow's full evaluation, a motion for sanctions based on the submission of fraudulent medical documentation, and a formal complaint to the South Carolina Board of Medical Examiners regarding Dr. Gerald Hessen. Kyle came by on a Saturday afternoon, 3 days after Wells filed the response. He came alone on his bicycle, the way he did sometimes on weekends when the house on the other side of town, wherever Cody's attention was pointing that day, felt too loud to think. Kyle was like that. He needed quiet the way some people need air, and he'd learned early on that my house on Rutledge Avenue tended to have it. We were on the back porch, me with iced tea and him with a glass of water, not talking about anything in particular. The oak tree was fully in leaf by then, the yard shaded and still. At some point I heard him set his glass down, and when I looked over, he was watching the fence line with the expression I'd come to recognize as him working up to something. "Grandpa," he said, "can I tell you something?" "You can tell me anything you want," I said. He looked at his hands for a moment. "About 3 weeks ago," he said, "I was upstairs doing homework. My door was open. Dad was in the hallway on his phone." He paused. "He doesn't always notice when I'm up there." I waited. "He was talking about someone called Dr. Hessen," Kyle said. He said the name twice. And then he said 500 cash and just needs to be signed before the 15th. He looked at me. I didn't know what it meant then. But then I heard Mom talking about the papers you got served, and He stopped. "I recorded it on my phone. I didn't know if it mattered. It was just a habit, kind of." He pulled out his phone and held it out to me. I looked at the phone for a moment. Then I looked at Kyle. 14 years old, sitting in the afternoon shade on my back porch, his expression carrying a weight that no 14-year-old should be familiar with. "You don't have to show me that," I said. "That's your choice. I want you to know that." "I know," he said. "I want to." I took the phone. The recording was 43 seconds long. Cody's voice slightly muffled by the distance from an open doorway, but clear enough. "Hessen. Yeah. He just needs to sign off on the evaluation form. Listen, 500 cash. I'll have it to you by Thursday. It just needs to be dated before the 15th. That's all I'm asking." A pause. Then, "No one's going to look that closely at it. He's 68 years old. His doctor retired. There's no record to compare it against." Another pause. Shorter. "Just do it." I listened to it twice. Then I handed the phone back to Kyle. I sat for a moment with my hands in my lap, looking at the oak tree. Somewhere down the block, a lawnmower started up and then stopped again. A mockingbird in the magnolia by the fence ran through about 6 different songs without settling on any of them. I closed my eyes. That evening, after Kyle had gone home, I sat at my desk for a long time without doing anything. The 1887 navigation chart of Charleston Harbor was spread out in front of me, weighted at the corners with small glass paperweights. I'd been working on a section of coastline in the lower left quadrant, a stretch of shoreline that had partially faded, the original ink gone thin as water in certain places, requiring a particular kind of patience to restore without overworking the paper. I didn't touch it that night. I just looked at it. At some point I picked up the phone and called Marcus Wells. It was later than I would normally call, but he answered. "Kyle recorded a phone call," I said. I gave him the summary. There was a pause on the other end. A working pause. The kind where the person isn't surprised so much as recalibrating. "How old is he?" Wells said. 14. "Did anyone ask him to make the recording?" "No. He did it on his own. He said it was a habit." Another pause. "I need to speak with him directly," Wells said. "With you present, and with his mother's knowledge. Nothing coercive. I just need to understand the circumstances and explain to him what options he has." He paused again. "Raymond, I want to be very careful here. This is a minor. Whatever he chooses to do, it has to be entirely his own decision, with full information. Is that clear?" "That's exactly what I want," I said. The meeting with Wells and Kyle happened the following week, in Wells's office on Broadway Street. Shannon knew about it, Kyle had told her himself, which I had not asked him to do, but was glad he had. She didn't come to the meeting. She called me beforehand, her voice tight and careful, and said, "Just make sure he's okay." "He will be," I said. Wells met with Kyle for about 40 minutes. I sat in the waiting area outside his office, reading a magazine I wasn't actually reading, listening to the muffled rhythm of a conversation I couldn't hear through the closed door. At one point, a paralegal brought me coffee, which I accepted. When they came out, Kyle looked the way people look after a conversation that required them to think hard about something that actually mattered. Slightly tired, but also steadier than before. The way a structure looks after it's been tested. Wells looked at me with a particular expression that told me, without words, that it had gone well. He'd like to submit a written statement, Wells said. He understands what that means and what it doesn't mean. He wants to do it. I looked at Kyle. He looked back at me with his grandmother's eyes and his own particular kind of quiet. You're sure? I said. Yeah, he said. He was lying about you. That's not okay. That was all he said. It was enough. The preparation of Kyle's written statement took another 10 days. Wells was meticulous about it. Every sentence had to reflect what Kyle himself had observed and heard, with no embellishment and no coaching. The statement was 2 pages, single-spaced, describing in plain and specific language what Kyle had heard from the hallway, when he had heard it, and the circumstances under which the recording had been made. It included a copy of the audio file, authenticated by a digital forensics technician Wells brought in to certify that the recording had not been altered. Alongside Kyle's statement, Wells assembled the complete package: Pamela Stroud's investigative report with the $287,000 wire fraud documentation, the Coastal Meridian Investments credit application, listing my properties as assets, the Dr. Farrow evaluation versus the Dr. Hessen affidavit, the 3 months of bank statements showing rental income routed through Palmetto Evergreen Holdings, and the original 6 months of notes from my desk drawer. Dates, figures, document names, in my own archival handwriting. It was, Wells told me when we reviewed it together, one of the cleaner financial fraud packages he had assembled in 20 years of practice. He said it without pride and without particular warmth, just as a professional assessment of the work. I appreciated that. We submitted it to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division for South Carolina on a Wednesday morning. Wells drove it downtown himself and delivered it by hand to the duty agent, with a cover letter formally requesting an investigation under 18 U.S.C. Section 1343. Then we waited. Life in the house on Rutledge Avenue during this period had a quality I can only describe as the quiet before a particular kind of weather. Cody was still there. Shannon was still there. The children moved through the house with the careful diplomacy of people navigating a space that had become charged in ways they couldn't fully name. Cody had stopped speaking to me directly. We existed in a state of managed avoidance, passing in the kitchen without acknowledgement, a courtesy that suited me perfectly. He was spending more time away from the house, which I attributed to either his attorney or his creditors, or both. I went fishing on the Cooper River that Saturday. I caught a decent-sized redfish, about 22 inches, and released it back without ceremony. I came home, grilled something simple for dinner, and spent the evening working on the lower left quadrant of the 1887 chart. The coastline section I'd been avoiding was finally responding, the original ink coming back under careful treatment, the line resolving itself out of the fade. My neighbor Marjorie Tennyson, 71 years old and constitutionally incapable of walking her dog past my front porch without stopping, paused at the gate that evening and called up, "Raymond, you look like a man who's decided something." "I'm always deciding something, Marjorie," I said. She considered this, decided it was true, and moved on down the street. 3 weeks passed. On a Thursday afternoon, I was in the backyard when my phone rang. It was Marcus Wells. "They accepted the submission," he said. His voice was careful and deliberate, the way it got when he was delivering something significant and wanted to make sure each word landed correctly. "The U.S. Attorney's Office for South Carolina has assigned a case coordinator. That means the federal prosecutors are actively reviewing the material." I looked at the oak tree. A cardinal, different one from February, or maybe the same one, impossible to say, was sitting on the fence post in exactly the same spot as before, regarding the yard with the same expression of alert suspicion. "Thank you, Marcus," I said. "There's nothing to do now but wait," he said, "and stay quiet." "I'm good at that," I said. I set the phone in my pocket and sat down in the porch chair. The afternoon was warm and still, the kind of late spring afternoon in Charleston that makes you understand why people have lived here for 300 years. Somewhere inside the house I could hear Cody on his phone again, the same pressured cadence, the same clipped sentences. He had no idea. The federal prosecutor's office was, at that moment, reading a package that included his voice on a 43-second recording, his name on fraudulent medical documents, his signature on 2 LLC registrations connected to $287,000 in wire transfers, and a 14-year-old boy's straightforward, two-page account of what he had heard from an upstairs hallway. I picked up my iced tea and looked at the yard. It was a very pleasant afternoon. 3 weeks after Wells delivered the package to the FBI, I was in the kitchen making lunch when my phone rang. It was Wells. "Kyle's interview is confirmed," he said. "The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit reached out this morning. They want a formal statement. Voluntary, with an independent court-appointed attorney present. Not me. A separate attorney entirely for Kyle's protection, no connection to anyone in the case." "When?" "End of the week? I've already spoken with Shannon. She's agreed to have Kyle participate." He paused. "The federal prosecutors are moving faster than I expected, which means the package was stronger than either of us hoped." I said I understood. I thanked him and set the phone down. I stood in the kitchen for a moment, looking at the backyard through the window. The oak tree was in full summer leaf, dense and dark green, throwing shade across most of the grass. 14 months ago, Cody Pierce had moved into this house with a plan he'd been building for longer than that. He had looked at this kitchen, this yard, these walls, and seen a resource to be extracted. He had looked at me and seen an obstacle to be managed, an old man who wouldn't understand what was happening until it was too late. I put the kettle on and finished making lunch. Kyle's formal interview with the FBI investigator took place 4 days later in a federal building on Meeting Street, a different office from the courthouse on Broad Street, deliberately neutral ground. I did not attend. The court-appointed attorney who represented Kyle's interests during the interview, a woman in her 40s named Patricia Hanover, assigned through the Federal Public Defender's Office, called Wells afterward to confirm that the statement had been given completely voluntarily, that Kyle had answered every question clearly and without hesitation, and that the recording of Cody's phone call had been accepted into evidence. Kyle called me that evening. He sounded tired in the way that people sound tired after doing something that required them to hold themselves very still for a long time. "You okay?" I asked. "Yeah," he said. "It wasn't bad. They were pretty nice, actually." "You did a good thing," I said. There was a pause. "Grandpa," he said, "did you know this was going to happen? Back at the beginning, I mean." I thought about February. The kitchen, the quitclaim deed, Cody's satisfied expression as he walked upstairs with what he believed were the signed papers. I thought about the folder I'd been building for 6 months before that night. I thought about the blank receipt form I'd prepared 3 weeks before Cody ever put that deed on the table, because I had read the direction of things clearly enough to know where they were going. "I knew something was going to happen," I said. "I just made sure I was ready for it." He was quiet for a moment. "Chess," he said finally. "Chess," I agreed. The call from Wells came on a Wednesday afternoon, while I was on the back porch working on the 1887 chart. I'd been at the lower left quadrant for 3 weeks, a stubborn section of coastline where the original ink had faded almost to nothing, requiring a particular combination of patience and restraint that I was finally beginning to get right. "The U.S. Attorney's Office has issued a formal summons," Wells said. "Cody Pierce is ordered to appear for examination before Assistant U.S. Attorney Daniel Crawford. The hearing is at the federal courthouse on Broad Street." I set down my instrument. "Crawford is AUSA," Wells continued. "That's an Assistant United States Attorney. He's a federal prosecutor. This isn't investigative anymore, Raymond. This is prosecutorial. They're building a case." "When does Cody appear?" "End of next week." I looked at the oak tree. A mockingbird was going through its repertoire in the magnolia by the fence, cycling through songs with the restless energy of someone who can't settle on a single thing to say. "Thank you, Marcus," I said. I set the phone down and picked up my instrument and went back to the coastline. I didn't see Cody leave for the courthouse. I didn't need to. I knew the address, 85 Broad Street, a building I had walked past hundreds of times during 37 years of working 2 blocks away. I knew the lobby, the elevator bank, the particular quality of institutional light in the hallways. I knew what it felt like to sit in those rooms with documents on a table in front of you, because I'd spent the better part of my working life adjacent to exactly that kind of proceeding. Shannon texted me at 5:43 that afternoon, He's on his way home. I didn't respond. I was working. The first call came in at 6:12. Cody. I looked at the screen, set the phone face down on the desk, and continued working on the chart. By 8 o'clock, I had 14 missed calls from Cody's number, 6 from Shannon, 3 from a number I didn't recognize, and 2 from a number that Wells later confirmed belonged to Cody's attorney, a man named Gary Spite, out of a firm on King Street. By 10 o'clock, the total was 31. I turned off the overhead light, switched on the desk lamp, and kept working. The coastline section was finally coming together, the ink responding to the treatment the way old materials sometimes do when you've stopped rushing them. The original line resolving itself out of the fade, one careful millimeter at a time. By midnight, I checked the screen one more time. 67 missed calls across 4 numbers. I set the phone face down again and went to bed. I slept well. In the morning, I made coffee and sat on the back porch. The July heat was already present before 7 o'clock, the kind of thick southern morning that settles over everything like a second blanket. I checked the screen. The final count was 112 missed calls. I put the phone in my pocket and drank my coffee. At 8:20, Pamela Stroud called. "Raymond," she said, "the FBI has frozen the accounts associated with Palmetto Evergreen Holdings." A pause. All of them, as of yesterday afternoon. I watched a dragonfly work its way along the fence line in short, precise movements. "He knows it was you," Stroud said. "He's known for a while," I said. "This is different," she said. "Before, he thought he could outmaneuver you. Frozen accounts means he can't access any of the funds he was counting on for the investor payments. He's going to be in a very difficult position very quickly." "I imagine so," I said. "Raymond." Her voice shifted slightly. "Be careful. Desperate men sometimes make choices that careful men don't anticipate." "I appreciate that," I said. "I'll be careful." I finished my coffee and went inside to call Wells. The week that followed had the quality of a pressure system moving in, the kind you can feel before you can see it, a heaviness in the air that makes every ordinary thing feel slightly more deliberate than usual. Cody was in the house, but barely. He came and went at odd hours, his jaw set, his phone permanently in his hand. He had stopped the fiction of normal household behavior entirely. No more dinner at the table. No more performed pleasantness in the hallways. What remained was something stripped down and functional, a man managing a crisis, using the house as a base of operations, and not particularly concerned about what anyone else in it thought about that. Shannon moved around him carefully, the way you move around something unstable. I watched her from a distance I'd spent 41 years learning to calibrate, close enough to be present, far enough to not apply pressure. She knew things were serious. She didn't know the full shape of it yet, and I wasn't going to be the one to draw it for her. That was her work to do, and she had to do it herself. The specific moment that changed something in her happened on a Tuesday evening. I heard it from my room. Not the words, but the sequence of sounds. Cody's voice, raised and clipped, then Kyle's voice, shorter, and then silence in the way that silence happens when someone has been told to be quiet in a tone that doesn't invite argument. Then Cody again, the same register, the same cadence he used when he was managing a situation he felt was going sideways. Then a door, then Shannon's footsteps in the hallway, going toward the kitchen. I stayed in my room. She called me 3 nights later, just after 11. The house was quiet. I'd heard Cody come in sometime around 9 and go straight upstairs. Shannon's room had been dark since 10, or so I'd assumed. My phone lit up with her name. I answered on the second ring. "Dad," she said. Her voice was low and careful, the way voices get when someone is speaking in a room where they're not entirely certain of being alone. "Shannon," I said. A pause. "I'm sorry," she said. I know it's not enough. I just need you to know that." I sat with that for a moment. There were things I could have said, and there were things I shouldn't, and there were things that simply weren't the right things for this particular moment in a phone call at 11 at night. I picked the one that was true and simple. "You don't have to apologize to me," I said. "You're my daughter." She was quiet for a long moment. I could hear her breathing. Outside my window, something moved in the oak tree, a branch settling in the slight breeze that had come up off the river. "I need to take the kids somewhere for a while," she said finally. "My friend Carol in Mount Pleasant, just for a little while." "That sounds like a good idea," I said. Another pause. Are you okay with everything?" "I'm fine," I said. "I've been fine." "Okay," she said. She sounded like someone who had been holding something very heavy for a long time and had just set it down and wasn't entirely sure yet how to stand without it. "Okay, thank you, Dad." "The door's always open," I said. "It always has been." 3 days later, Shannon loaded 2 bags and a laundry basket into her car, got the kids in, and drove to Mount Pleasant. Brittany waved at me from the back window as they pulled out of the driveway. I raised my hand. Cody watched from the front porch with an expression I recognized from negotiations. The flat, recalibrating look of a man who has just lost a piece he was counting on and is already adjusting his strategy around the gap. The eviction notice had been prepared by Marcus Wells in April and held, waiting for the right moment. The notice was grounded in a straightforward legal reality. Cody Pierce had no lease, no written tenancy agreement, and no property interest in 2214 Rutledge Avenue. His presence in the house had existed entirely on the basis of an informal, verbal permission extended by me as the property owner. Under South Carolina law, that made him a licensee, not a tenant, and a license to occupy property can be revoked at will by the property owner, with a written notice and a reasonable time to vacate. Wells had set the notice period at 30 days, which was more than sufficient. He served Cody on a Thursday morning personally at the front door. I was in the kitchen and heard the exchange. A few sentences from Wells, clipped and formal, and then a longer silence, and then the front door closing. Cody came into the kitchen a minute later. He stood in the doorway and looked at me with an expression that had moved past anger into something colder and more considered. "You think this is over?" he said. It wasn't quite a question. "I think you've been served a legal notice," I said. "The rest is up to you." He stood there for another moment. Then he walked out. He had 11 days. On the 8th day, Wells called. He filed for a temporary restraining order against the eviction, Wells said. He's arguing that his status in the property constitutes a common law tenancy based on duration of occupancy and contribution to household expenses. Does he have a case? "No," Wells said without hesitation. "There was no lease, no written agreement, no rent payments. His contributions to household expenses are undocumented and legally irrelevant to tenancy status. But he's buying time and he knows it. The TRO hearing is in 7 days. I was quiet for a moment. "Raymond," Wells said, "he's also filed an emergency motion to reinstate the incapacity petition, arguing that new evidence has emerged. This appears to be a coordinated effort to bog down multiple proceedings simultaneously. It's a delay strategy." "He's stalling," I said. "Yes, because with the Palmetto accounts frozen, he has no way to pay his investors, and every day he stays in this house is a day he's not dealing with the consequences outside it." "That's my read," Wells said. I looked out the kitchen window at the oak tree. The light through the leaves was the particular thick gold of a July afternoon, the kind that makes everything look slightly more permanent than it is. "Let him file," I said. "Every motion he files is another document with his name on it, going into another court record. Let him build his own case against himself." I paused. "We're ready for the hearing?" "We have been since April," Wells said. "Then let's go," I said. I set the phone down and picked up my coffee mug. Outside, a cloud moved across the sun, and the gold light shifted to something cooler and more even, the kind of light that's easier to work in. I had about 2 hours before the afternoon heat peaked. Plenty of time to make progress on the chart. I went back to my desk. The TRO hearing was on a Tuesday morning in a courtroom on the 3rd floor of the Charleston County Judicial Center on Broad Street. I arrived with Wells at 8:45. Cody was already there, seated at the respondent's table with his attorney, Gary Spite, a compact man in his mid-50s, with the cautious expression of someone who has recently been given a difficult brief and is not entirely certain he was given all the facts. Cody was in a charcoal suit that had seen better days. He looked like a man who had not been sleeping well, which, given the sequence of events of the past several weeks, seemed reasonable. He didn't look at me when I came in. That was also reasonable. The hearing lasted 2 hours and 20 minutes. Judge Patricia Okafor presided, a careful, thorough woman who read every document herself, rather than summarizing from counsel summaries, which extended the proceeding, but produced a proceeding where every relevant fact was on the record. Wells presented the ownership chain for 2214 Rutledge Avenue, going back 31 years, the absence of any lease or written tenancy agreement, the notarized trust documents filed at the Register of Deeds, and a detailed accounting of Cody's 14 months of residence without any documented rental payments or formal arrangement. Gary Spite argued that duration of residence and contribution to household operations constituted an implied tenancy under South Carolina common law. He cited 3 cases. Wells distinguished all 3 in under 8 minutes, pointing out that each precedent involved documented financial contribution and mutual written acknowledgement that the court lacked here. Judge Okafor asked 2 questions, both of them directed at the factual record rather than legal theory. She ruled from the bench. The petitioner has presented no documentation establishing a tenancy relationship, she said. Oral permission to occupy property does not create a tenancy under South Carolina law, absent mutual acknowledgement of a landlord-tenant relationship. The motion for a temporary restraining order is denied. The eviction notice stands. Cody's jaw tightened. Spite wrote something on his legal pad without looking up. Furthermore, Judge Okafor continued, the court notes the pending matter of the incapacity petition in the civil track and directs that the eviction schedule be maintained independently of any civil proceedings, as the property ownership is not in dispute in the current proceeding. She was already moving to the next case. The incapacity petition hearing came 3 days later in a different courtroom before a different judge. This one went faster. Wells had filed Dr. Farrow's evaluation, 91st percentile across all cognitive domains, alongside the formal complaint submitted to the South Carolina Board of Medical Examiners regarding Dr. Gerald Hessen. The board had responded within 2 weeks of the original filing with a notice that Dr. Hessen's license was under review for potential violations of professional conduct standards. That notice was in the record. The judge, a deliberate man named Hollis Everett, read both medical evaluations in silence for approximately 7 minutes. Then he looked at Cody's side of the courtroom. Counsel, he said to Spite, is the petitioner prepared to address the discrepancy between the evaluating physician's methodologies? Spite said he was not prepared to address it at this time and requested a continuance to obtain supplemental documentation. Judge Everett denied the continuance. He noted that the petition had been filed with urgency and that a continuance at this stage would be prejudicial to the respondent. He then dismissed the petition without prejudice, adding that if new and properly documented medical evidence were obtained through standard clinical channels, a new petition could be considered. A formality, given that Hessen's license was already under review, and no legitimate physician was going to produce a dementia diagnosis for a man who had just scored in the 91st percentile on a certified neurological evaluation. Outside the courtroom, Spite spoke briefly with Cody in the hallway. I didn't hear what they said. I was putting on my jacket and discussing scheduling with Wells. As we walked toward the elevator, I happened to glance back. Cody was standing alone by the window at the end of the hall. Spite had gone. Cody had his phone in his hand, and he was looking at it with an expression I hadn't seen on him before. Not the calculating stillness of a man managing a situation, not the performance of confidence he'd maintained through the kitchen confrontations and the eviction notice. What was left, when all of that fell away, was something much simpler. A man who had run out of moves and knew it. I looked at him for about 3 seconds. Then I turned and got in the elevator. The day Cody left the house, I was not there. This was intentional. Wells and I had discussed it, and the consensus was that my presence would introduce a dynamic that served no legal or practical purpose. A process server and a sheriff's deputy were present to document the vacating of the property, in accordance with the eviction order. I spent that morning fishing on the Cooper River. I caught nothing of consequence. I didn't particularly need to. The Cooper in August has a heavy, still quality to it, the water dark and slow, the banks dense with summer growth. I sat in the boat for about 3 hours, watching the line and the water, not thinking about much. When I drove back to Rutledge Avenue that afternoon, the house was empty. I unlocked the front door, my key, the original, the one I'd had for 31 years, and stood in the hallway for a moment. The house was quiet, in the way that houses are quiet when something that was filling them has left. Quieter than I remembered it being, actually, because what I remembered was a specific quality of quiet that comes from living alone in a space that is entirely your own, undivided, unhurried, free of any undercurrent. I walked through to the kitchen. The counter was clear. The table was clean. The window over the sink was full of afternoon light. I put on coffee and sat down. A few minutes later, I called Kyle. "How are you doing?" I asked. "Pretty good," he said. "Mom said you got the house back." "I've had the house the whole time," I said. "It just had some extra people in it for a while." He was quiet for a moment, and then he laughed. A real laugh, not a polite one, the kind that catches you by surprise. "Fair enough," he said. "I'm going fishing Saturday," I said. 6 in the morning, Cooper River. "You interested?" A pause. Then, "I'll be there at 6. I drank my coffee. That evening, Wells called. "I heard from Gary Spite this afternoon," he said. "He's reaching out on behalf of Cody with a settlement proposal. Cody is prepared to sign a formal document abandoning all claims, present and future, to any property associated with the Raymond A. Coleman Revocable Living Trust, in exchange for a letter from us indicating no further civil action will be pursued." "What about the federal investigation?" "That's the other part," Wells said carefully. "He's asking whether we would be willing to communicate to the U.S. Attorney's Office that Cody's cooperation on the civil matter should be considered in their deliberations." I sat with that for a moment. "Marcus," I said, "do I have any standing to influence the federal investigation?" "No. The U.S. Attorney's Office conducts its investigations independently. A letter from civil counsel in a property matter would have no meaningful effect on their process." "So what Cody is actually proposing," I said, "is to formally surrender something he never had in exchange for something I can't give him." A pause. "That's a precise summary, yes." I looked at the keys on the windowsill, the set I'd had for 31 years, sitting on the sill where I'd set them when I came in that afternoon. "Tell Spite I have no objection to receiving a formal document, abandoning all property claims," I said. "That's in everyone's interest and costs nothing. As for the federal matter, tell him I'm not a federal prosecutor. That decision is not mine to make." "I'll relay that," Wells said. "Good night, Marcus," I said. I set the phone down and sat in my kitchen in the quiet house on Rutledge Avenue and listened to the evenings settle in around me. Autumn came into Charleston the way it always does, not with the dramatic shift you get further north, but gradually, the heat releasing its grip in increments, the light changing its angle, the mornings becoming something you could actually stand to be outside in without immediately reconsidering. I was on the back porch with my coffee on a Friday morning, about 2 months after Cody had vacated the house, when my phone rang. It was Marcus Wells. "The federal grand jury returned an indictment this morning," he said. 3 counts. Wire fraud under 18 U.S.C. Section 1343, document falsification, and conspiracy to commit fraud. The U.S. Attorney's Office has issued a formal statement. I set my coffee mug down on the arm of the porch chair. "All 3 counts?" I said. "All 3. The conspiracy count is significant. It implies the prosecutors have identified at least one other participant in the scheme, almost certainly connected to the Coastal Meridian entity, or the mortgage applications." He paused. "Sentencing exposure on wire fraud alone is up to 20 years per count under federal guidelines. With 3 counts, depending on how the judge weighs the factors, Cody is looking at a very long and very expensive road ahead." I looked at the oak tree. The leaves were starting to turn at the edges, the green giving way to something drier and more honest. "Did Spite sign the property abandonment document?" I asked. "Filed and recorded at the Register of Deeds yesterday morning," Wells said. "Formally, completely, and permanently. All 3 properties are now uncontested assets of the Raymond A. Coleman Revocable Living Trust." A brief pause. "It's over, Raymond. The civil matter is entirely resolved. The trust stands." I picked up my coffee. "Thank you, Marcus," I said, "for everything." "You did the work," he said. "I just filed the papers." That was the most professionally accurate thing anyone had said to me in months. I appreciated it. Shannon called me that same afternoon. She was matter-of-fact about it, the way she gets when she's decided something and doesn't want to spend time approaching it indirectly. She told me she had retained a family law attorney in Mount Pleasant and was filing for divorce. She had found an apartment for herself and the children, a 2-bedroom in a decent part of town, first and last month's rent managed. She told me the children were doing reasonably well, considering. Kyle was quiet about it, which she said she'd stopped interpreting as a problem and started interpreting as Kyle. Brittany had asked, with the direct logic of an 11-year-old, whether they could still come to my house on Saturdays. Shannon had told her yes. "Dad," she said near the end of the call, "the attorney, the family law attorney, her retainer was paid by someone. The office wouldn't tell me who." I looked out the kitchen window. "Probably an error in the billing system," I said. A pause. "Probably," she said. She didn't sound like she believed it. She also didn't sound like she was going to push it. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Come to dinner Sunday," I said. "All 3 of you." The 1887 navigation chart of Charleston Harbor was finished on a Wednesday evening in the middle of autumn. I set down my instruments and looked at it under the desk lamp for a long time. The coastline section in the lower left quadrant, the part I'd been working on for 3 months, the stubborn fade that had required more patience than I'd sometimes felt I had available, was resolved. The original ink was back, the line clean and certain, the harbor rendered in the precise, unambiguous language of a chart, made by someone who understood that ships would navigate by it, and that accuracy was not optional. I rolled it carefully, wrapped it in archival tissue, and set it in the flat drawer. The collector in Savannah who had inquired about it 6 weeks ago was going to be pleased. He'd offered $2,400 for an 1887 chart in this condition, restored to this quality. That was a reasonable price. I had already decided I would accept it. There are things I could tell you about Cody Pierce's situation in the weeks that followed the indictment. The news reports, the departure from Tidewater Property Group, the rumors that circulated through Charleston's real estate community about the scope of what the federal investigation had uncovered. But I want to be accurate about what I actually know versus what I heard through channels, and I want to be equally accurate about how much of my attention it occupied. The answer, honestly, is not much. I had spent the better part of a year in a very focused state of mind, building a case, protecting property, moving carefully through a situation that required precision and patience, and the willingness to act when acting was necessary, and to wait when waiting was necessary. That state of mind is useful when you need it. When you no longer need it, the healthy thing's to set it down, the way you set down an instrument when the work is finished. I set it down. Saturday mornings became, again, what Saturday mornings had been before any of this. The Cooper River, the rods, the cooler with water and a sandwich, the particular quality of light on the water at 6 in the morning, when the heat hasn't yet asserted itself, and the river is still and dark and full of its own business. Kyle came most Saturdays. He was a patient fisherman, which I had always suspected he would be. He didn't talk much, which suited us both. We caught things and released them and occasionally kept something worth taking home. Brittany came on Sunday afternoons and occupied the back porch with homework and questions about whatever she was currently thinking about, which ranged widely and required no particular continuity from one visit to the next. She had her mother's laugh, which was her grandmother's laugh before that, and which filled the house in a way that the house seemed to have been waiting for. Shannon came to dinner on Sundays. We didn't discuss Cody or the case, or the sequence of events that had brought us to this particular Sunday evening at this particular kitchen table. We ate and we talked about other things, and sometimes we didn't talk at all, and the quiet wasn't the pressured quiet of a house where something dangerous was being held together. It was the ordinary quiet of people who have known each other a long time and don't need to fill every moment with sound. One evening in October, I was sitting on the front porch when Marjorie Tennyson came by with her dog. She stopped at the gate, which she always did, and looked at me with the shrewd, comfortable expression of someone who has been watching their neighbor's household for long enough to have formed opinions she mostly keeps to herself. Quieter around here lately, she said. It is, I said. Good quiet or bad quiet? I thought about that for a moment. The regular kind, I said. She considered this, nodded once, and moved on down the street. There's one more thing I want to say, and I want to say it simply, without more drama than the situation requires. I've spent 37 years handling documents that described what people did to each other. Agreements broken, property stolen, signatures forged, trust violated in ways both spectacular and mundane. I processed those documents, cataloged them, filed them in the correct drawers, and went home. I understood them as facts about human behavior, not as lessons or warnings. When Cody Pierce put that quitclaim deed on the kitchen table, when he threatened to take my grandchildren from me, the way you threaten someone with something you assume they cannot survive losing, I don't think he imagined that the 68-year-old man sitting across from him had spent his entire working life learning exactly how these situations unravel. I signed, just not what he put on the table. That's the whole story, really. Everything else, the lawyers, the investigators, the trust documents, the FBI, the grand jury, was just paperwork. I know how paperwork works. I always have. The keys are on the windowsill. The chart is finished. Kyle will be here Saturday at 6. That's enough. If you like this story, subscribe to our new channel and listen to a few stories there. You can find the link to it in the collaboration or description of this video, or in the comments. Subscribe so you don't lose us, because this channel may soon cease to exist.